Max Richter, the film Miss Sloane works on many different levels. It's a political thriller, it's a character study, it's about a hot button issue. So, as the composer, what were your initial thoughts and inspirations for the score?
Well, there were really two things. The first, obviously, is the subject matter itself, which is, a sort of quite high-powered, political, twisty narrative, full of energy and a lot of information. So that was the sort of psychological texture of the whole thing. And then the other pole in the music is really the extraordinary performance by Jessica of this lead character, Miss Sloane, and her trajectory through this landscape.
Mhm. Let's talk a little bit about Miss Sloane. She's such a rich and complicated character. She's a hard ass lobbyist for Washington. She doesn't get a lot of sleep. She's kind of isolated, doesn't have a lot of friends. So, talk a little bit about expressing her character through that music.
Well, with this sort of question, you really are in the realm of the experimental a lot of the time. Trying to find the correct sort of language and the right sort of colors for storytelling is a mixture between, theory and planning and conceptualization, and then really experiment, because it's really only when you meet the material with the music that you start to join them up, and then you hope that things catch fire. And this is the kind of thing which is very exciting, actually, on working on a project like this.
Mhm. Well, give us some insight into what the initial spotting session was like. I mean, the music plays such a dominant force in the film. So, were you working off of temp music? What was that like?
Yeah, there was some temp. John had temped the film basically with other music of mine. There was a lot of music from the leftovers and various things from some of my albums. So yeah, it was a mix of things, and that's, in a way, it's quite useful. Even though obviously I've already written that music, so I'm not going to write that music again. But no, it is useful because it allows you to get very close to some of the intentions in the material, and it's a good way to kind of get a conversation started. But I tend really not to pay very much attention to temp scores, I have to say.
Mhm. So then, when you start writing your initial themes, what is that process like? I mean, are you watching the film without sound, or give us some more insight in there?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm really minutely observing what the pictures are doing, what the characters are doing, what the emotions of the story are doing, minute by minute, second by second. And it's amazing, actually, when you look at something very, very carefully, the amount of information that's coming off, an extraordinary performer like Jessica. And of course, in this script, so much information. So it's actually part of the process in this film is trying to figure out, what it is that the music can do that, some other aspect of the storytelling isn't already doing. In other words, why music?
Mhm. So then, what were those sounds for?
A couple of major strands of material. The first is something I would maybe describe as kind of adrenaline. And this is a sort of glassy electronic pulsation. And it's the raw material of it is just a bunch of sort of interlocking pulsy material which I made, and then that gets kind of formed and stretched and sort of manipulated through the drama, and it ends up being the kind of a spine of the propulsive material. And then there's another kind of material, and that is maybe more somber, more serious, more inward. It's a kind of orchestral language, and that speaks to her inner world, her struggles, her uncertainty, her failures, all of those things, that we go through.
Right. And then how do you I guess, blend those two very different kind of themes so that they sound like they're a part of the same movie and not just a mishmash.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, that's always the challenge, isn't it? Trying to make things feel inevitable and natural. And that always takes hours and hours of work, making things feel inevitable and natural. That's the paradox of it. Yeah, I mean, it was about actually sort of uh, trying to find some meeting point between these two languages where they could occupy a common space, and then they could sort of reflect different aspects of this world and it feel quite natural.
Right. So if you could point to a specific moment in the movie where you say, my music works very well with this image, this moment, what would that be for you?
Well, for me, my favorite sort of music and image moments in the movie are actually all to do with these sort of big set piece courtroom scenes. There's also a lengthy sort of TV interview as well. And what's happening in those moments is that Jessica is just talking, 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 talking. And what I did is I basically wrote some very, very low frequency music, which is mostly electronic, partly orchestral. And it feels like a sort of cosmic amniotic fluid that kind of just sits underneath her. But it is very emotional because the harmonic language of it is very emotional. So it's sort of it's a sort of more of a feeling than a sound, but it does have a sort of a warmth and a sort of tenderness about her as a human being. So yeah, that's something I'm very happy with the way it worked.
Right. It's funny you mentioned scoring for Jessica talking, and so much of the movie is just people sitting and talking in rooms, but it works very well as this sort of legal political thriller.
Yeah.
There's a lot of suspense in the film. So how do you create suspense through your music, especially in moments where it's just people talking?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's there are mechanisms, which we can employ as composers to do with withholding resolutions and that sort of stuff, which is sort of harmonic tricks which you can invoke. Um, but actually, in this case, it's just so well acted. A lot of the time, I was sort of feeling like really what I'm trying to do is to just let the acting sort of speak through this incredible sort of blizzard of data and just sort of support it. So there was basically no sort of heavy lifting where the score is having to do kind of utility work, because it's actually all there in the edit and in the performances.
Right, right. And your music just does a really good job of underscoring what's already there. So working with John Madden, what did he give you as a director that helped you along?
Well, John is just a fantastically enthusiastic guy. I mean, he's a very, very smart man, and has done I think a very elegant job with very complex and very demanding material, and it's also very sensitively handled. And his taste and feeling for music is very evolved, and he has a great feeling for where and how much, which is not always the case with directors actually, because often you'll find someone who's because they're so close to the material, basically they lose a kind of objectivity and then end up with music which maybe is sort of too much in the wrong places, or not enough. And it's a really a feeling thing, and you need a certain amount of objectivity about it. And I think John was very, very good in that way. He has a real sense of the big picture at all times, which is great.
And you're right, it is sensitively handled. I mean, you can imagine the version of this movie where it hits you over the head with the message about how guns are bad, and your
Yeah.
music underscores a big triumphant speech in
Yeah.
the courtroom. um, um, so, you've been around a while. We hear your music, even if you don't score a film, we hear your music oftentimes in movies. I mean, just this past year in Arrival, they used a song that probably makes you a lot of money because it's used in so many movies.
Yeah.
Um, Talk a little bit about your background and what got you into music and eventually into composing. Was it always the goal to be a composer?
Well, I did a very straightforward kind of classical music education, university, conservatoire, postgrad. I was sort of half a pianist and half a composer at that time. And over the years, I got involved with electronic music and more concert music and started making my own records. And people started licensing the material into their movies, so and then kind of in a way, sort of organically, I started to get asked to write movies. And for me, music is really a storytelling activity. I think we're storytelling creatures. Um, it's a human universal, that from the bedtime story to, everything basically we do is about that. So I'm very interested in storytelling languages. I'm doing a ballet right now, another opera, records, movies, all sorts of different things to do with narrative. And so for me, it's one of the things I do, and I very much enjoy, the sort of whole collaborative aspect of it. The I feel like working on a movie is a bit like a sort of set of experiments or sort of research project. It's a sort of collaborative attempt to sort of solve a puzzle. How music, why music, what should it do, what can we bring to the situation, how can we, light up this material even more. I mean, it's a fascinating series of questions, and it's a very enjoyable part of my work.
Right. And what attracts you to the films that and the television shows that you decide to come on board and score?
Sure. Well, I guess a common theme really in most of the things I've done is that they have a kind of social political dimension. There's a lot of, going way back to Waltz with Bashir, or a film like Sarah's Key, say, or Laura. I mean, these are all sort of films which are about, the sort of big questions of our society, big questions of politics. And Miss Sloane obviously fits right into that, you know, that sort of group of projects.
Right. Well, it's a great movie and a great score. Thank you so much, and congratulations.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.